I'm so pleased to be able to welcome to our virtual stage someone who, well, I guess is a geoscientist, but who I have had the absolute pleasure of working with for many years. And I met Vanessa when I was fairly early on in my career, and just have had huge respect for Vanessa. So please give a round of applause to the fabulous Vanessa Lickfold. Thank you very much. Now, Vanessa, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody and let us know what it is you're up to at the moment?
Well, thank you very much for that. And honestly, I was blown away by being asked to be here today. So it's a really good opportunity for me to do something a little bit different. And you'll hear as I go through, hopefully as we go through the discussion, I'm not going to profess to be an ESG expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm absolutely passionate about it. And having been in the industry for 30 plus years, I am convinced that there is a way of doing what we do so that we are more responsible and we don't carry on repeating mistakes of the past. So as I said, I've been in the industry for 30 years, done lots and lots of different things, from exploration through mining to new product developments to a little bit of closure to change management, leadership uplift, all things in between. And had the fantastic opportunity of working with Satara as a group, but also doing a whole bunch of other work in risk management, yeah, you name it, a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to maybe delve into the things that I'm not so good at. So I've had to do a bit of background reading. So I'll be referring to my notes a little bit as we go, but looking forward to the discussion.
There is no shame to referring to notes at any point in time. And I think, Vanessa, what you were saying there in introduction is we all identify as something. So yes, I'm a geoscientist originally, but I'm passionate about ESG, just like you. So just because you're one thing doesn't make kind of constrain you to be really excited in something else. So yes. With regards to that research and perhaps some of those notes, when we talk about trust, what does that mean to you?
So for me, it's actually quite intangible. So it sort of has to go down to a belief or a confidence that one person has in another person or an organization, that they're honest and reliable, capable and willing, I think, is an important part of that, of fulfilling the promises and commitments that they make. So because it is so fundamental to all of our relationships, we need it, because we form all of our close connections by having this confidence and belief that, somebody's got, my best interests at heart. And without that, we can't collaborate and we can't cooperate. So when I did that little bit of research, I went and I found that Mayer and others in 1995 said that there were 3 fundamental elements of trust, and that was integrity, ability, and benevolence. And that trust really does exist when all 3 of those converge together. So when we look at this in a little bit more detail, that integrity is really a perception that a set of acceptable principles and standards are being followed by the person or organization that you're trying to establish this trust with. And then if I think about ability, that really is that knowledge and skills to have influence in a specific area. And then the last one that, we take it for granted that benevolence is a measure of wanting to do good. But I think Alison said earlier, it can't only be for monetary profit. It has to be a measure of that real want to do good. So that's where I've come to in terms of what does it actually mean when I think about trust.
That's brilliant, and thank you so much for explaining that in such a succinct manner. That's brilliant. So if we take that then, Vanessa, and we apply it to the raw materials value chain, sort of in its entirety, we all talk about, there's a lack of trust, etc., etc. But what do you think are some of those key stumbling blocks that we face within raw materials?
So for me, I really thought about this, but I'm going to narrow it down to just the one that I think is the biggest one. And that is this apparent oxymoron of what I call trusted mining. And in preparation for this, I actually asked ChatGPT to explain trusted mining as an oxymoron. And the simplicity of its response was actually quite confronting. So please forgive me, but I am going to read this because it was really quite enlightening. So trusted mining can be considered an oxymoron because the two words seem to contradict each other. Trusted implies that something is reliable and honest and dependable, while mining refers to the extraction of minerals and resources from the earth, often with little regard of environmental impact and ethical concerns. The word mining can also bring to mind images of unscrupulous individuals or corporations exploiting natural resources for their own gain. Combining these two words, trusted mining, suggests then that it is possible to extract resources from the earth in a way that is both trustworthy and sustainable, which can be seen as paradoxical or contradictory. And when I read that, I was just like, whoa, hang on a minute. That is actually quite confronting for somebody having been in the industry for so long, because I genuinely believe it is possible. But, we have to get this right, and we have to get it better, because, it is fundamental that we do carry on doing the mining that we do, because we do need the raw materials for our net zero world in future. But without the trust, then how do we get there? So that to me is the biggest stumbling block, is this apparent oxymoron. Yeah, let's leave that one there.
I love the fact that you went to ChatGPT, and I think this is something we won't go into that avenue of AIs and the potential opportunities and threats, etc. But what it does give us is a really interesting reflection of, okay, based on all of that data up until, when was it, August 2021, which is the learning data set for ChatGPT, what did the internet think? And
exactly.
That is, it's damning. So what do you think are some of those, I guess, those failures within the raw materials value chain that has led to the likes of the internet along with the code that sits behind ChatGPT to govern what it spits out? What do you think are some of those failures that are really triggering that response from ChatGPT?
Yeah. I think I'm going to sort of go into 5 of them, but probably the one that sort of hits us almost all the time, sort of smack between the eyes, are the environmental failures. I mean, we just see them again and again. But I wanted to think of 2 slightly different and maybe not the sort of run-of-the-mill examples. And I want to sort of demonstrate some of this where it is apparent that we're not learning. So, and which is maybe where some of the OpenAI source data comes from. So in 1984, for example, in Butte, Montana, a large section of the Berkeley open pit wall collapsed, and that actually resulted in millions of cubic liters of acidic acid, acidic metal-rich waters going into the surrounding areas. And although that did prompt significant improvements in regulations in management of toxic mining waste, 30 years later, in 2014, we had a dams failure at Mount Polly in British Columbia that again released millions of cubic meters of waste and tailings into the surrounding environment. So, if I think of that, and I chose those as different examples from the ones that we always hear, because they might, we need to think a little bit more broadly. I then think of social failures, and some of those, I mean, we can just cast our minds back to, for example, the rapid expansion of gold mining in Ghana in the 1980s and 1990s, that was accompanied by forced evictions, property destruction, violence, etc. And, you know, if we cast our minds forward to 2021, police actually used tear gas and live ammunition at Kamoa-Kakula in the DRC to disperse protesters who were there demanding compensation for land, you know, that was taken over when a mine came in. So these things are there as well. You know, we don't have to cast our minds back to all that far to think about governance failures and the corruption charges against mining executives and companies in Africa. But again, that's now. But in 1999, for example, Mount Isa Mines was accused of bribery and corruption in their operations in Papua New Guinea. And actually, there were executives convicted in 2002 on those charges. So I'm painting this dreadful picture that we don't learn, but I'm hoping we'll get some opportunities to learn. One other one, supply chain failures. I mean, although the characters in the movie Blood Diamond were fictitious, the events depicted in the movie were based on real examples of conflict diamond mining and real lived experiences of individuals in Sierra Leone during that country's civil war. And, you know, the last one I wanted to mention was safety failures. And that is, and I'm going to use Western Australia as an example and cheat to say that the reason was because I could get the data quickly, so I didn't have to do too much looking around. But, you know, in the 1970s, there were 114 deaths related to mining. This reduced to 89 in the 80s and 23 by the time we got to the 2010s. But despite all of our progress, that statistic is at 5 already, and we're not halfway through the 2020s. And so if I think about all of those negative failures and how the media and a lot of the hype that we have drums them up and sort of focuses on those things because they're the headlines, you know, I'm not surprised with what we hear in terms of that, you know, apparent contradictory framework right at the beginning.
So I guess part of this is acknowledging those failures and owning them and saying what's the way forward. But is it all doom and gloom, or are there some areas of success as well that we can point our fingers at?
Totally. And this is where I think we can absolutely do better in what we do so that we don't all focus on the doom and gloom. You know, if I think about environmental successes, I can't think of one mining company that doesn't have a net zero target or at least emissions reductions, you know, not one. And BHP, for example, said that they'll reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030, and then be net zero by 2050. You know, if I think of some of the social successes and really addressing social issues, I'm going to use a Western Australian example here, and that is the state inquiry into sexual harassment against women in the fly-in, fly-out mining industry that they conducted last year. Now, that was pretty confronting and sort of swept under the carpet for many years, but it resulted in such an amazing sort of ground surge of activity in that space. And there isn't a mining company in Australia, I reckon, that hasn't actually started implementing recommendations to just stamp it out. So I think that is an enormous success in terms of one of those social successes. An example of a governance success, I mean, most companies have demonstrated, you know, governance and transparency improvements. And I mean, this conference is another example of exactly that. But again, trying to find mining company examples, Anglo American implemented their new anti-corruption policy in 2020, simply called Choose to Do the Right Thing. And I just love the simplicity of that, because that is what is happening. And I think there are lots of examples out there. You know, going into supply chain successes just this morning, I couldn't believe it. It was in my talk already, and then I found a new example, is Coppermark, which is an assurance framework for promoting the responsible sourcing and production of copper, announced that they surpassed 25% of global copper production goes through Coppermark. I mean, that is amazing considering that they only started in 2019. Another example in last week's Mining Weekly was an agreement between Circular, which is a technology company, and SQM, a really big lithium company, where they are going to use technology, Circular's technology, to ensure literally end-to-end lithium supply chain traceability from the mine, from lithium at SQM mines, all the way through to battery EV batteries. But what I found fascinating was that their ultimate aim is to be able to dynamically track scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of all of their participants. And I mean, if I think about that in terms of some of the failures, I think that success is fantastic, and we should be really thinking about that. Last but not least, some of the safety successes, a lot of them are technological. But the new ones now are, and I like it because it's underground and open pit and sort of all in between, is the use of cameras and radio frequency ID technology that really just detects people, equipment, and does real-time alerts so that if there is any idea that there could be a condition, like machines cut out, etc. And I just think that with that sort of technology, it's just going to get better.
I think this is really exciting, Vanessa, and you're quite right. These are stories that we don't hear, and we very rarely hear other sectors say, "Hey, I'm going to learn from mining," because look at all of the, these great aspects that they have brought to being. So, final question, I guess, from me, which is, okay, so there's all this potential that's there. How do we actually build that trust within those ESG and beyond conversations within the raw material value chain?
I think for me, I found an article called "Begin with Trust" that was written by Frey and Morris in 2020. And they mention that trust has 3 drivers: authenticity, and we've heard almost all of it before, so I'll be very quick on this. It's basically authenticity, logic, which is basically, your reasoning is sound, and then empathy. I genuinely care about you and your success. But as we heard earlier, in terms of trust can be lost. And what they go on in their article to say is that breakdown in trust is usually when one of those trust drivers has a trust wobble. And they call it a trust wobble, which I just think is really, it's really good. But it can result from a very small change in behavior. And so once you have a trust wobble, the first way of being able to start building it is recognize which one had the wobble, and then try and balance it by really looking at 5 things essentially. And they said was reliability, was consistently doing what you say you're going to do. Competence, which is really demonstrating that deep understanding of the relevant subject matter. Just be honest all the time. Be authentic and own your mistakes if you make them, and really demonstrate that empathy to your stakeholders, that you hear them and that you are building your relationship on mutual respect and understanding. So, I've heard about showing commitment. I've heard about active listening, taking accountability. All of those things are how you build it. But, and I think it was James that said it, is transparency is king. Regularly communicate your data, regularly ask for areas of improvement. Be open and honest about your ESG challenges and failures. But as we've heard, be open and honest about your successes as well, because the media does tend to hype on the negative. And my view is that there are all of these positive things going on, and that with all of these positive things going on, trust is a 2-way street. So with that being a two-way street, we can, prove ChatGPT wrong. Let's all do that. Let's actually come up with that vision of trusted mining being possible, actually being that reality, based on working together and finding solutions to these things.
Absolutely brilliant, Vanessa. So our goal here is to make sure that at some point in time in the future, when said AI is asked, what do you think of trusted mining? It comes back with a more positive answer.
This is happening. It's
exactly. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much, Vanessa. It has been brilliant speaking to you. Everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Vanessa Lickfold. Thank you very much.